In a recent video, we discussed how the pathologically lying fraud and freshman Republican Congressman George Santos survived an attempt by his fellow Republicans to kick him out of Congress. But there's more to the story, including a poorly received attempt by Santos to thank Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin for voting to save him, the soothing insight and commentary of outgoing Democratic Congressman Jeff Jackson, and culminating in a disastrous CNN interview with Santos himself, who demonstrates absolutely no self-awareness whatsoever. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, we've got a couple of clips to play, but first things first, we're actually going to start with, believe it or not, a letter. What am I talking about? Well, after George Santos he needed a 2/3 majority to be kicked out of Congress, and he cleared it with room to spare. But he survived an attempt by his fellow Republicans to get him kicked out of Congress. And 31 Democrats actually voted to save him, including Congressman Jamie Raskin. So Santos typed up a letter and sent it to people who voted to save him, including Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, who is a former constitutional law professor, okay? So this is what the letter says. The letter says, "Dear colleague, I'm writing to express my gratitude to you for standing up for the principles of due process and the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Never in the history of this body has an expulsion been carried out before a member has stood before a jury of their peers and been convicted of the alleged crimes they've been accused. I want to sincerely emphasize that I know your vote was not done for me, but for the sanctity of this institution and the possibility of setting a very dangerous precedent. For that, I thank you, squiggle, squiggle, George Santos." Now, Jamie Raskin apparently, he was feeling really sassy and feisty, so he pulled out his teacher's pen, again, because he used to be a law professor, and he corrected it. So, of course, George Santos uses the wrong principal. He, instead of principles, your convictions, he refers to basically the person who is running a school. He should say that has been convicted of the alleged crimes of which they have been accused. So he added that as well. And then he struck the possibility of setting a very dangerous precedent to avoid setting a very dangerous precedent. And then Raskin scribbled a handwritten note at the bottom. "Dear Congressman Santos, I appreciate your note, and only with someone who'd proofread it first. Meantime, you should apologize to the people of New York for all of your lies and deceit. I know you must have thought you could have got away with all of that in the party of Trump, but the truth is resilient." And then he signs it there at the bottom. He says, "P.S. It's not shameful to resign." Congressman Santos has absolutely no intention whatsoever of resigning. So these are clips from a disastrous CNN interview conducted in the aftermath of his surviving that expulsion attempt. And this is him basically downplaying all the lies that he said during the course of his 2022 campaign.
Thought they were electing one person.
Nobody elected me. Nobody elected me because I played volleyball or not. Nobody elected me because I graduated college or not. People elected me because I said I'd come here to fight the swamp. I'd come here to lower inflation, create more jobs, make life more affordable, and the commitment to America. That's why people voted for anybody. To say that they voted based on anybody's biography, I can beg you this. Nobody knew my biography. Nobody opened my biography who voted for me in the campaign.
It seems to not be the case because, again, 80% of his own constituency want him to resign. We have polling. We've discussed it in previous videos. So his constituency believes that his lies mattered, even if he thinks that they're immaterial. It's absolutely preposterous, to say nothing of the fact that he actually hasn't done any of the things that he promised to do, suggesting he is going to be a liar there. If you've lied about elements of your biography, things you shouldn't have had to lie about in the first place, then how can you be trusted to tell the truth about things that matter most? Food for thought. Here's a second and final clip from this CNN interview. The full thing will be released in a couple of days. And this is, again, Santos demonstrating absolutely no self-awareness whatsoever.
And then they expel you, and then they put someone else in the seat. You're going to run in 2024.
Absolutely.
Can you win a primary given all these things that are lined up against you?
Yes.
And the general election. This is a Biden-leaning district, and you have all these issues against you.
Could I have won the general election last time? Nobody said I could, but I still
tried. It was
tried.
a different situation.
No, I understand, but elections are tricky. There's no predetermined.
So even if he is expelled from Congress, George Santos, whom, again, 80% of his own constituents want him to resign, he's going to run again for Congress. Absolutely absurd. So with that in mind, I want to turn your attention to the ASMR voice of this outgoing Democratic congressman. And when I say outgoing, I mean he's leaving office. Jeff Jackson, who represents North Carolina, and he's been featured in many of our videos. He's a great guy, great communicator. Due to the shameless, despicable partisan gerrymandering in North Carolina, he's being written out of his district. So he's going to serve the remainder of his term, but he will no longer be in Congress, and he's actually running for the Attorney General position of North Carolina. But I digress. This is what Jeff Jackson has to say about the effort to expel George Santos. And again, he's a Democrat, and he's also going to explain why he, like Jamie Raskin, voted to protect Santos from this expulsion.
We just had a vote on whether we should expel Congressman Santos, which just means should we kick him out of Congress. There is strong agreement that he made up most of his life story, and now he is also charged with the alleged misuse of campaign funds. I've called on him to resign, and I still think he should. Here's the issue. Congress is doing an ethics investigation into him right now. The House Ethics Committee has interviewed 40 witnesses. They've reviewed over 100,000 pages worth of documents, and in about 2 weeks they are scheduled to give us their formal report. We've only kicked out 5 members of Congress in the history of our country, and the precedent has always been that before you get kicked out, you get some kind of due process. Getting convicted of a crime involves due process, and so does a congressional ethics report. But since we don't have either of those things yet, what this vote would have done is change the precedent to say you can get kicked out without any due process. And that would be bad. It's better to have a formal process where the person who is accused gets to be heard and has some rights. Skipping that step might feel okay with someone like Santos because he's kind of a worst case scenario in a lot of ways. But the question isn't really about Santos. It's about where do we want to set the threshold for kicking out a member of Congress. And if we decide that we're okay kicking someone out without giving them any due process, it's going to lead to all kinds of problems down the road. It's going to make this system really easy to politicize and weaponize. It's also completely unnecessary. All we have to do is wait 2 weeks, get the ethics investigation. It'll make the case against him stronger, and we'll know that he got his due process. So why was this brought now instead of in 2 weeks? Because a group of congressmen in New York are worried about ads that are going to run in the next election that tie them to Santos. So they're doing everything they can think of to distance themselves from him and attack him, and that includes trying to shortcut the process to kick him out so they can look like they're being as tough on him as possible. The vote failed and he was not expelled. Not yet. I wound up voting against most of my party on this, but I thought it was the right thing to do.
So, again, it's basically in line with what Congressman Raskin said in his remarks in the aftermath of voting to protect Santos as well. And as I said in my video, and I'm not going to relitigate the whole thing, I certainly understand the logic, and I think Jeff Jackson is particularly earnest and that he sincerely believes in due process. I just don't think that Santos is particularly entitled to any. This is a political position. This is not a criminal conviction, which you are definitely, it's incredibly important that you are entitled to due process. Moreover, he's already admitted to openly lying and engaging in conduct that makes him unfit for office in a very despicable way. And as far as the fear of it being politicized, well, you need a 2/3 majority, so that's a pretty high threshold to have, even if Republicans would be gunning for Democrats. So I understand both sides of it, but you let me know what you think in the comments in terms of where you stand. In the meantime, George Santos apparently is running for re-election despite his enormous unpopularity and reliability and the fact that his own caucus despises him. Let me know what you think in the comments about that.